Welcome to Monobiology. Today we're going to have a lesson on classifying bacteria. So there are two major groups or kingdoms of bacteria, Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria, and this lesson's all about the different ways in which we classify those different types of bacteria. The major differences between the two kingdoms are as follows. Archaeobacteria are all heterotrophs, whereas Eubacteria can be either autotrophs or heterotrophs. Archaeobacteria also tend to live in extreme conditions. In fact, Archaeobacteria weren't discovered until recently, simply because of the extreme conditions they lived in. We didn't feel that there was anything living in those areas. Also, the technology that we've developed over the last couple of decades has allowed us to discover these creatures that live in these extreme conditions. Archaeobacteria is a fairly new and will likely change because technology develops. We'll find more and more of them. They contain three groups: the methanogens, the halophiles, and the thermophiles. Methanogens literally means methane generators. That means they produce methane gas, and they're a group of Archaeobacteria. The halophiles, and that literally means salt-loving, and these are bacteria that live in extremely salty areas like the Dead Sea, for example. You can see in a picture here, this is the Dead Sea. Obviously it's called the Dead Sea because it's so salty that nothing would actually be able to live in there, or so we thought. Until we did a little bit more research, we discovered that in fact these guys, the halophiles, can actually live in there. Now really salty areas, not like your typical salt marshes, but places where the pH is very different than where most living things can live, would be an area where these guys would thrive. Finally, we have the thermophiles. Thermophilia is loving high temperatures. These organisms basically love living in areas like the mouth of a volcano or underwater vents where the temperature is extremely high and very few, if any, other organisms can survive. Let's shift gears now to Eubacteria. Right, so there were three major groups of Archaeobacteria. Let's look at how we classify Eubacteria. Eubacteria are much more well known, obviously, than Archaeobacteria. And in fact, Eubacteria inhabit nearly every square centimeter of every part of this planet, and that includes the ones that live on our skin, in our mouths, and on the inside of our bodies. There are more bacteria in your mouth than there are people on planet Earth. Now, how do we classify Eubacteria? The three major ways to distinguish one type of Eubacteria from another are the shape of the cell, the different types of respiration and nutrition, and reproduction and growth. And so those are the three groups we look at when we're classifying bacteria. Let's start with the shape of the bacteria cell. There are, in fact, three general shapes. The first one is spherical, the second one is rod-shaped, and the third one is spiral-shaped. We're going to look at each of these, and I'm going to actually get you to draw a couple of pictures to add to your notes as we go through. So the first type is spherical-shaped. Bacteria that are spherical-shaped go by the following name. Singular is coccus, and plural is cocci. Alright, so here's what I want you to draw. I want you to draw the single sphere, the double sphere called the diplococci, the staphylococci, and you can see that's like a group of spherical, and then we have the streptococci. And you've probably heard of strep throat before, and so strep is a chain of spherical bacteria, streptococci. So you're going to draw this one, this one, this one, and this one, of course, label them. Don't worry about these last two, the sarcina and the tetrad. Don't worry about those. So how do we name these bacteria? Well, the name of the bacteria often has to do with the shape of the cell. For instance, we have one called Staphylococcus aureus. That's its genus and species name. It's written in binomial nomenclature. It's italicized. If you're writing this in your notes, you're going to want to capitalize the genus name and lowercase the second one, but you're also going to want to underline both of them because it is, in fact, its binomial nomenclature, its genus, species, name. So Staphylococcus aureus would be these guys here. They come in clumps. And then, of course, we have these guys, Streptococcus pneumoniae. Streptococcus pneumoniae are chains of spherical bacteria. Also, they can cause two things, strep throat and pneumonia, which is where their name comes from. Now, Staphylococcus aureus is the most common bacteria found in our skin. Rod-shaped bacteria go by the name bacilli. So here's the ones I'm going to get you to copy down. You're going to copy down the bacilli, the diplobacilli, and the streptobacilli. So 1, 2, 3. All right, so again, diplo meaning two, strep meaning chain. So they're kind of a rod shape, right? And you can get them singular in pairs or in chains. There's no there's no clumps of these ones. Now, here are the names of some bacilli bacteria. Actinobacillus actinomycetum Try and say that one. It's a tough one. Most of these bacteria do not have bacilli in the name, however. So there's another example called E. coli, which I'm sure most of you have heard of before. And E in the E. coli, again, these are scientific names. So make sure you capitalize the first one and lowercase the second one and underline both. E in E. coli stands for Escherichia. We just shorten it to E. Okay, so those are the bacilli bacteria. Now we're going to talk about the spiral-shaped bacteria. Bacteria that are spiral-shaped are referred to as spirilla. And there's only one type. They always come as individuals. Naming them, however, Spirillum volutans. And some of the names don't have spirilla in their name, like Helicobacter pylori. Now, helico comes from the word helix, which is a spiral shape. You may have heard of the double helix in DNA. So it kind of looks like a double helix. That's what DNA kind of looks like, right, like that. Anyway, so Helicobacter pylori actually does have spiral shape in it. It's just a different way of saying it. All right, the second way we classify eubacteria is respiration and nutrition. Okay, so there's three different categories for respiration. There's obligate aerobes, which means they have to use oxygen. There's obligate anaerobes, which means they can't use oxygen and they don't want to. And then there's facultative anaerobes. They can survive with or without oxygen. Generally, they prefer not to survive with oxygen. All right, so here's what I'm going to get you to do. I'm going to get you to copy down, oops, wrong button there. All right, I'm going to get you to copy down this little set of test tubes, okay? Specifically number 1, number 2, and number 5. Okay, so how does this experiment work? Well, basically, we get a bunch of nutrients that the bacteria like to eat, and we put them inside of a test tube. Okay, then we place the bacteria into the test tube, and we watch where the bacteria grow. Now think about it. The obligate aerobes, they would grow close to where there's lots of oxygen. So test tube 1 is the obligate aerobes. Test tube 2 is the obligate anaerobes, because they grow the furthest away from the oxygen that they possibly can. These guys here are the facultative anaerobes. They don't really care if there's oxygen or not. So they kind of grow all the way through it. They don't really matter. It doesn't matter to them if there's more oxygen or less oxygen. They grow throughout the whole thing. Now in these two test tubes, chances are what happened here was a mixture of different types of bacteria. There was some what we call cross-contamination going on in those. Okay? So make sure you draw 1, 2, and 5. Jot down kind of what happens in this, right? We put the nutrients in the tube, put the bacteria in, and watch where they grow. That's what happens in that. Right? And then we can identify what type of respiration they use. In terms of nutrition, there are two types of nutrition that bacteria can use. Heterotrophic, which means they eat their food, or autotrophic, which means they make their food. And there are actually, believe it or not, two types of autotrophs. We've talked quite extensively about photosynthesis. However, there are also a type of bacteria that can use chemicals in the surroundings to build their own food, and those are called chemoautotrophs. So they don't use light, they use chemicals. If you think about things that would live way deep down in the ocean where there isn't any light, the chemoautotrophs could exist there, or way under the ground where the light wouldn't get to. The chemoautotrophs could exist there. Okay, so those are the two different types of nutrition, Finally, we have reproduction and growth. That's the last category we can use to classify eubacteria. All bacteria reproduce asexually. That's a fact. And they use a process called binary fission. This is the process here, and it's very similar to mitosis. One cell basically divides into two identical cells. All bacteria reproduce that way. However, some bacteria actually have the ability to share genetic information with their counterparts. And when they do that, that is kind of like sexual reproduction in a way, but you're not really creating a new being. You're just passing genetic information from one bacteria to another. So it's a little bit like reproduction, but at the same time kind of not. Anyway, it's called conjugation. Here is a picture of conjugation, or a diagram of conjugation. So you have your two bacteria are kind of hanging out, and one bacteria is like, hey, you don't have this piece of DNA, would you like it? And you can see what happens. They kind of join up, and one piece of DNA that the one bacteria has is kind of copied, and now both bacteria have it in the end. And that's conjugation. All right, folks, if you can answer these questions, then you have a good start on what you need to be able to understand for classifying bacteria. Make sure you've taken good notes off this video, but that in a nutshell is how you classify bacteria. Bring your questions, as always, to class.